Hey there, it's Karenology. This level of audacity is off the charts. You have to hear this.
You know what they say about family secrets? They never stay buried. I'm Frank Rothschild, 71 years old, retired history teacher, and I learned that lesson the hard way when I came back from Uncle Albert's funeral to find strangers splashing in my pool like they owned the place. The sight hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Kids were cannonballing into the deep end. Adults were grilling burgers on my late wife Martha's favorite barbecue set. And someone had strung up a banner with the Homeowner Association logo right across my front porch. My front porch, mind you, where Martha and I used to sit every evening for 45 years. I stood there in my funeral suit, still smelling of cemetery dirt and disappointment, watching a red-headed woman in a hot pink swimsuit directing this circus like she was born to it. Karen Blackwell, all 200 pounds of her, wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She spotted me from across the yard and waved like we were old friends meeting at a church picnic. "Mr. Rothschild, perfect timing. Welcome to the community pool party," she hollered, her voice carrying that fake cheerfulness that sets my teeth on edge. I marched over there, my blood pressure climbing with every step. What in God's name is going on here? This is my house, my pool. The words came out sharper than I intended, but watching some kid break my living room window with a beach ball had stripped away whatever politeness I had left. Karen just smiled wider, pulling out a manila folder thick as a phone book. "Well now, that's where it gets interesting, Mr. Rothschild. See, after dear Albert passed, we discovered some fascinating documentation about this property." While she talked, I watched my carefully maintained backyard transform into a disaster zone. Someone had spilled ketchup all over Martha's white garden chairs, the ones she'd saved up for months to buy back in '78. Beer cans floated in my pool like dead fish, and I could see muddy footprints tracking across the deck I'd spent 3 weekends staining just last month. When I demanded everyone leave immediately, Karen whistled through her teeth with the kind of sharp blast that makes dogs whimper. 2 security guards and matching Homeowner Association polo shirts appeared like they'd been waiting in the wings. "Mr. Rothschild seems to be having difficulty adjusting to the new arrangement," Karen announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "Boys, would you mind escorting him inside so we can discuss this privately?" The way she said privately made it sound like a threat wrapped in velvet. The guards flanked me like I was some kind of criminal, and I felt every pair of eyes in the yard watching as they marched me toward my own front door. Inside my kitchen, Karen spread papers across the table where Martha and I used to eat breakfast every morning for 4 decades. The documents looked official enough to fool a judge, all legal letterhead and fancy seals. "Your Uncle Albert took out a substantial loan 40 years ago," she explained, her finger tracing lines of text like she was reading scripture. $50,000 secured against the entire property, including your house. The lender was Blackwell Construction, my daddy's company. I stared at those papers feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. "That's impossible. Albert never mentioned any loan. I've been living here since 1976, paying taxes, maintaining everything." Karen's smile never wavered as she flipped to another page. After Albert's death, that original $50,000 has grown to $340,000, with accumulated interest and penalties. Since you're the heir, the debt transfers to you. You have 72 hours to pay in full, or the property reverts to the Homeowner Association for debt recovery. The room started spinning slightly, the way it did when my blood pressure spiked. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling every one of my 71 years settling into my bones like winter cold. Albert would never have risked the family home. He knew Martha and I had nowhere else to go. Karen reached into her briefcase and pulled out a leather portfolio filled with similar documents. "Mr. Rothschild, I hate to speak ill of the dead, but your uncle had what we might call a gambling problem. Poker, horses, you name it. Daddy helped him out several times over the years, always for a reasonable fee." She wasn't just the Homeowner Association secretary, I realized as she talked. Karen Blackwell was completing her father's legacy. A 30-year plan to control every property in the neighborhood through creative financing. Her portfolio contained deeds and contracts for 15 other houses, all acquired through similar mysterious debts that appeared after the owners died. She'd turned property acquisition into a family tradition, passed down like grandmother's china. I pulled out the family photo I keep in my wallet, taken in 1953 when I was 5 years old, standing with my parents and Uncle Albert in front of this very house when it was still under construction. Albert had his hand on my shoulder, making that promise that echoes in my memory even now. This house will always be ours, Frankie, a family nest that nobody can take away. Karen glanced at the photo like it was yesterday's newspaper. People change, Mr. Rothschild, especially when they're playing with fire and running out of other people's money. That evening, after the party finally ended and Karen drove away in her luxury SUV, I sat in my study surrounded by 40 years of family photographs and documents, feeling more alone than I had since Martha passed. My hands shook as I opened the letter Albert had sent me just a week before his death, a letter I'd been too busy with my own problems to really absorb at the time. Frank, he'd written in his careful teacher's handwriting, I need to ask your forgiveness for mistakes I made long ago. There are things hidden in the safe, and the truth is more complicated than it appears. The combination is Martha's birthday. She always brought clarity to confusion. The old wall safe behind Martha's portrait opened with a rusty click that seemed to echo through the silent house. Inside, alongside some cash and Martha's jewelry, I found documents that made my blood run cold. A second copy of the loan agreement, but this one looked different somehow, and underneath it, a note in Albert's shaky handwriting from his final days. Roger Blackwell forged my signature in 1981. I have proof, but I've been too frightened to act. Karen threatened little Timmy if I ever spoke up. My grandson Timmy, my daughter's boy who'd been struggling with addiction and money problems for 2 years. The same grandson who'd barely spoken to me at Albert's funeral, who'd seemed nervous and distracted throughout the service. Suddenly, the pieces of a much larger puzzle began falling into place, and I realized that Albert's death might not have been the beginning of this nightmare. It might have been the end of his silent suffering. As I sat there in the lamplight, holding evidence of a 40-year conspiracy, I heard Martha's voice in my memory as clearly as if she were sitting beside me. Frank, you're a history teacher. Your job is to preserve truth for future generations. Tonight, I understood that lesson was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. They hit me at dawn, just when the robins started arguing with the crows. I was on the porch sipping weak coffee, trying to piece together Uncle Albert's note, when a black quadcopter buzzed out of the gray sky and hovered 3 feet above my face. Its rotors hissed like angry hornets, camera eye blinking red. I raised a broom, but the thing darted back and forth, recording every wrinkle on my tired mug. A second later, my phone vibrated. A single text from an unknown number. Nice pajamas, Frankie. Enjoy the show. Karen's fingerprints all over it, smug and perfumed. Anger can light a fire under old bones better than liniment. I marched to the curb, flagged down the first passing mail truck, and stuffed Albert's forged loan copy into an envelope addressed to Karen's Homeowner Association office. On the flap, I scribbled, "Proof of your father's crime. Meet me at noon, or the whole town sees it. Sometimes you have to bait the shark with blood." Noon found me in the fluorescent chill of the county clinic, the only neutral ground I trusted. Smell of disinfectant, muffled coughs, the slow beep of a heart rate monitor leaking from somewhere down the hall. Karen strutted in late, a neon scarf fluttering behind her like victory bunting. She carried a leather folder, but left her usual entourage outside. Just her, me, and the humming soda machine. I lowered my voice. 2 copies of this contract exist. One bears your daddy's handwriting, the other my uncle's terrified confession. You void that debt and walk away from my property, or I ruin whatever sterling reputation you think you have left. She tilted her head, smile syrupy. Frank, you win. Let's ink a private settlement. 1 signature, debt forgiven, everyone happy. It was so easy I felt the hook slide into my jaw, but pride tasted sweeter than caution. I signed, she countersigned. We shook hands, her perfume smelled of gardenias and gasoline. 5 minutes later, a fire alarm howled through the clinic, lights strobing crimson, doors slammed automatically, steel shutters rattling down the hallway. A calm voice ordered patients to remain in rooms. Then 2 paramedics in unmarked uniforms burst through the emergency exit, pushing an empty gurney straight at me. "Mr. Rothschild, County Health has issued an involuntary psychiatric hold. Please cooperate." I'd just traded a forged debt for a prison without bars. Karen, already backing away, winked. "You look stressed, dear. Mandatory evaluation, 72 hours. Doctor's orders." They wrestled me onto the gurney. Straps bit my wrists. Somewhere overhead, the drone banged against a window, its buzzing drowned by the fire alarm shriek. A nurse tried to jab a syringe into my arm, but then the building coughed. Power died. Fluorescent lights popping, machines choking into silence. Technical failure or divine mercy, I'll never know, but the blackout knocked out the magnetic locks. In the pitch-black corridor, I heard a familiar gravel voice. "This way, teach." Old Reverend Claiborne, 76, bad hip, but a Vietnam medic before he took the collar, had been visiting a parishioner. He cut my straps with trauma shears, shoved me into a maintenance stairwell smelling of bleach and dust, and we limped down 5 flights guided only by his cheap keychain flashlight. Outside, rain hammered the asphalt like drumsticks. Sirens wailed on the far side of town. "A transformer explosion," the Reverend said, "takes half the grid with it every time. Coincidence? Doubtful." We hid beneath the overhang of the ambulance bay while I caught my breath. My whole body trembled, not from age, but from the realization that Karen had staged a fake victory just to get me certified crazy. "She's going to declare the contract you signed null under mental incapacity," the Reverend muttered. "You need allies, son." An unmarked van crept into the lot. Side door slid open, and my grandson Timmy leaned out, eyes bloodshot, rain plastering his hair. "Grandpa, please, they just want to help you," he pleaded. Behind him, I saw one of Karen's security goons holding a taser. Timmy wasn't rescuing me, he was delivering me. Betrayal tastes metallic, like biting your tongue. I shook my head. "Not today, kiddo." The Reverend yanked me back into the shadows. The van rolled on, its headlights sweeping the puddles like searchlights in a prison yard. We splashed across the parking lot to the Reverend's rusty pickup. Wipers groaned as thunder cracked overhead. On the dashboard sat a half-eaten peppermint and a battered Bible. He handed me the peppermint. "For steady nerves," he said. Tasted like Christmas in a hurricane. He drove me to the church basement, an old stone cellar that smelled of damp hymnals and candle wax. There he opened a dusty file cabinet and pulled out copies of Homeowner Association bylaws older than Karen herself. "Knowledge is power," he whispered, "but power ain't enough. You need leverage." Before dawn, I slipped back home, hoping to salvage anything not yet ruined. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the difference. Air reeked of burnt plastic. In the kitchen, every appliance blinked lifeless. My laptop lay open, hard drive gutted, cables dangled like entrails. On the counter, a single Polaroid waited, me strapped to that gurney, eyes wild under the clinic alarm lights. Scrawled across it in red marker, "Unstable," a dead canary in my personal coal mine. City inspectors arrived at 10 sharp, clipboard warriors in yellow hard hats. They cited electrical hazards, mold, code violations I'd never heard of. One snapped photos of the gutted laptop, murmuring about unsafe wiring. They slapped a neon orange sticker on my front door, "Condemned pending review." Karen's bureaucracy swinging like a wrecking ball. I tried to protest, but 2 sheriff deputies, same ones who escorted Albert's casket 3 days earlier, blocked the porch. "For your own safety, Mr. Rothschild." Safety feels a lot like exile. I stuffed Martha's jewelry, Albert's note, and a change of clothes into a duffel and walked out under the deputy's gaze. Rain had stopped, leaving the air sharp with ozone. On the sidewalk, a sleek black sedan idled. Sarah Jones stepped out, trench coat flapping, anger blazing behind her glasses. "Your phone's dead. Email's bouncing. Thought you'd fallen off the planet," she snapped. Then softer. "We need to talk where ears don't grow on trees." She drove us to the deserted town library, stacks smelling of old paper, HVAC humming like a lullaby. In a narrow reading alcove, she opened her laptop, screen shielded by a privacy filter. Someone tried to hack my firm's server last night. Guess who? She tapped keys. Up came a satellite map dotted with red pins, cameras, license plate readers, Wi-Fi sniffers. Karen had spun a web of digital razor wire around half the county. Under each pin were invoices from Blackwell Construction, billed to the Homeowner Association's safety initiative. Tens of thousands siphoned monthly. We expose that, she burns, I said. Sarah slammed the lid shut. Exposed to whom? The county board she owns? The paper her cousin edits? Courts move slower than arthritis. You'll be in a padded room before any judge reads the first exhibit. I felt the walls close in. For the first time since Martha's funeral, I considered surrender. Maybe sign the house over, move into some shoebox apartment near my daughter, let Karen choke on her own greed. Then I remembered the look in Timmy's eyes, half guilt, half desperation, and I realized defeat would teach him one lesson. Wolves always win. I couldn't let that be my legacy. That night, I returned to the condemned house like a thief. No lights, just a crescent moon and the whisper of crickets. In the backyard, the pool glowed, not with water, but with green sludge. Karen had drained it halfway and dumped dye to make it look toxic for tomorrow's news crews. I knelt beside the cracked tile where Martha once rested her feet and let the cold, slick slime run between my fingers. Memory stung sharper than chlorine. A man can lose a house and survive, lose his purpose, and he's already dead. Inside, drones of generators hummed in the distance, Karen's crew prepping for demolition. I found Albert's old ham radio set in the attic, relic from his Navy days. Tubes still glowed amber when I powered it with a car battery. Static filled the headphones, a familiar white ocean. 40 years teaching history taught me one thing. Every empire falls from an infection within. Karen's empire ran on paranoia, data, and dirty money. Corrupt any two, the third topples itself. At 3 a.m., beneath a sky streaked by heat lightning, I made my decision. I'd let Karen see exactly what she wanted to see. An old man cracked by pressure, ready to sign whatever release she waved. I'd become the weakness in her plan, the variable she couldn't predict. If history favored the bold, then an old history teacher had one last lecture to give. When dawn bled pink over the rooftops, the county tow truck rumbled up, headlights sweeping my living room walls through broken panes. They intended to haul away my sedan for unpaid fines. I walked onto the porch in Albert's faded navy jacket, hands raised, a calm smile stitched to my face. "Gentlemen," I said, voice carrying across the silent street. "Take the car, take the furniture, take the very nails if it pleases Karen Blackwell. I'm done fighting. Tell her the house is hers." One deputy spoke into his radio. Less than a minute later, Karen's SUV rolled in, chrome sparkling like fresh ice in daylight. She stepped out triumphant, contract in hand, cameras following. I signed. The pen shook, the signature crooked. Cameras clicked. A drone buzzed overhead, broadcasting my capitulation in the high definition. Karen's smile split wider than state lines. She never noticed the Reverend across the street, leaning on his cane, murmuring into a walkie-talkie connected to Albert's ham radio frequency, now pumping a high-gain burst that jammed Karen's drone network. She never bothered looking at Sarah's old sedan parked behind the library book drop, trunk antennae bouncing as it sucked terabytes off the Homeowner Association surveillance grid, now vulnerable without encryption. Karen thought she'd witnessed the final capitulation of a frail old man. In truth, she'd just given him front-row tickets to her own unmasking. History loves an irony, and I was about to make sure the lesson stuck. But that revelation belongs to another chapter. For now, in the flashbulb glare of her victory, I felt the weight of Martha's wedding band in my pocket and whispered to myself, "Funny thing about surrender. It's the best camouflage in a war nobody sees coming." The town woke under a hard blue twilight, the kind that sharpens every shadow, and the first thing I heard was the clank-clank of a flatbed hauling demolition equipment down Maple Street. That metallic rhythm punched my chest like a slow war drum. 12 hours left before Karen Blackwell wiped my house from the map. Funny thing is, a ticking clock can either paralyze a man or wind him up tighter than a pocket watch. I chose the latter. At 5 a.m., I met Earl Switch Delaney behind the abandoned rail depot on the edge of town. Switch is 73, retired freight dispatcher. Still wearing the battered conductor's cap he swears brings luck. The depot smelled of creosote and wet steel, pigeons fluttering under the corrugated roof. A northbound freight groaned past, wheels screaming on rusted rails. The perfect cover for hush-hush talk. Switch slid open a wooden crate to reveal a stack of fuel vouchers and delivery schedules stamped Blackwell Construction. He tapped them with a nicotine-yellowed finger. Karen's trucks tank up at Miller's yard before every job. I brokered a deal. Yards dry till further notice. No diesel, no diggers. His grin creased like folding paper. I handed him Martha's engagement ring, my down payment for the Blockade. Price of principal, paid in diamonds. Dawn peeled back the clouds. The air tasted of damp iron. I drove to Pine Grove Park, a strip of pines bordering the river, where Reverend Claiborne waited by the old bandstand, cane hooked on a railing. Between us stood 3 burlap sacks stuffed with wildflower seed and a tin sign reading Veterans Memorial Garden, Land Trust Property, Do Not Disturb. The Reverend's voice carried the solemn echo of Sunday sermons. County Land Trust Charter lets any vet dedicate abandoned ground for memorial use. Your plot qualifies once the house is leveled. I felt my pulse skip. You mean I forfeit everything? He nodded. House turns to dust either way, but a memorial locks that soil in stone. Blackwell can't build a doghouse on it without triggering federal fines. Sacrifice, it seemed, would be my shield. Back at the condemned house, I walked each empty room, fingertips brushing grooves in the banister Martha used to polish with lemon oil. I whispered goodbye to the wallpaper we hung in '84, the squeaky floorboard in the hallway, the smell of cedar in the linen closet. A man shouldn't love wood and plaster more than flesh and blood, yet memory soaks into timber like sweat. Outside, I buried Albert's forged loan copy beneath the magnolia tree, marker stone carved with one word, truth. Then I dialed Sarah's burner phone. Stage is set, I said. She replied, curtain rises at 9, hold the line. 9 on the dot, a convoy of Blackwell trucks rolled up. But something was off. Engines coughed, backfired, sputtered dead. Drivers jumped out cursing at empty fuel gauges. Karen arrived in a pearl-white SUV, stilettos stabbing gravel, rage flashing under designer sunglasses. She barked into her walkie-talkie, demanded explanations, promised heads-on platters. I stood on the porch in Albert's faded navy jacket, calm as a statue. She stormed over, contract copy flapping in her fist. I own this property, old man. Out of my way. I smiled thin. Not your demolition to command anymore. I pointed to the edge of the lawn where Reverend Claiborne, Switch, and half a dozen gray-haired veterans planted the Veterans Memorial sign into fresh earth. Wind rattled the tin like church bells. Karen squinted, confusion breaking through arrogance. What is that? Land Trust dedication, I said. Federal Code 16-1874. Once consecrated, the ground's protected in perpetuity. Bulldozers cross that line, you face federal prison. She scoffed until her lawyer on speakerphone confirmed it, his voice shrinking with every clause he read. She tried another tack, waving the psychiatric hold papers. You're mentally unfit, contract void. This stunt won't last an hour. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small cassette recorder, the kind teachers used in the 70s, pressed play. My own voice from yesterday, recorded on that ham radio rig, crackled through the speaker. I, Frank Rothschild, of sound mind, willingly donate my property as Veterans Memorial. One sentence, witnessed by Reverend Claiborne, time-stamped, radio-logged, broadcast to half the shortwave hobbyists in the county. Not a secret document, not a courtroom exhibit, just a public vow carved in airwaves no judge could erase. Karen's jaw clenched so tight I heard molars grind. She spun toward her stalled trucks, kicked a tire, nearly toppled. Cameras from her own drone swarm circled overhead. But now the footage favored me. One stubborn elder protecting sacred ground while corporate machines sat powerless. She barked at a pilot, "Shut them off!" But jamming static from Switch's rail antenna fried every feed. Her empire of eyes went blind in a heartbeat. Thunderheads stacked over the hills, sky dimming like stage lights before a final act. Karen shouted orders to her security team to seize the house manually. 3 guards advanced, boots crunching gravel. I stepped forward, knees aching, but back straight. "Gentlemen, you cross that garden line. You desecrate a federal memorial. Your pensions won't cover the fines." They hesitated. Reverend Claiborne lifted a folded flag, the one that draped his buddy's coffin in '68, and sang the first trembling note of "Taps." The lonely bugle melody, even off-key, froze those guards mid-stride. Memories trump money every time. They backed away. Karen's last card was Timmy. She yanked him from the SUV, thrust him in front of me like a human shield. My grandson's eyes were glassy with shame. "Tell Grandpa to stop," she hissed. Timmy swallowed hard, looked at the veteran's sign, then at my tired face. "I'm done being your errand boy, Karen." He stepped aside, leaving her exposed. Betrayal sliced her composure. She slapped him, a sharp crack that echoed across the yard. The moment the blow landed, every witness saw the truth without a single newspaper headline. Rain burst from the clouds, fat drops drumming roofs, hissing on hot engines. Karen's perfect hair plastered to her cheeks like wilted petals. She screamed at the heavens, then at me, voice ragged. "You ruined everything!" I walked to her, opened my palm revealing the house key. "Take it," I said softly. "It opens nothing now but memories, and those you can't monetize." She snatched the key, hand shaking, then hurled it into the sludge-filled pool. The splash sounded like a gavel, ending an era. By afternoon, her trucks were gone, fuel still unavailable, permits tangled in red tape triggered by the memorial designation. Blackwell construction stock tumbled when suppliers canceled contracts, frightened of federal repercussions. Switch's Blockade had starved the beast. My public vow nailed the coffin. No journalists, no lawsuits, just a dry fuel tank and a garden seedbed where greed expected rubble. When the sun slipped behind the church steeple, I stood alone in the half-empty yard. Bulldozers had carved ugly ruts, but the veteran's sign stood unbroken. Wildflower seeds waiting for spring. Sarah drove up, handed me a plain envelope. Inside was a cashier's check, the anonymous buyer Switch mentioned when haggling fuel. Turns out Earl had sold my engagement ring to a private collector who paid double market out of respect for Martha's story. Enough to put Timmy in rehab and cover a modest rental for myself. Price of principals, refunded with interest by fate. I spent that night in the park, rain fresh air tinged with pine resin. I closed my eyes, heard Martha's laugh riding the wind, felt Albert's hand on my shoulder the way it looked in that faded photo. I whispered the lesson aloud so the trees could carry it to anyone listening. A house is wood, stone, and memory, but dignity is the roof over a man's soul. Protect one, you shelter the other. Next morning, I left Maple Street carrying only a duffel and a pocketful of wildflower seeds. Karen's empire would spend years untangling debt, fuel shortages, and the PR stain of slapping a junkie kid. As for me, I had a new lecture to write, one about how surrender can be camouflage, how sacrifice can be armor, and how history always rewards the stubborn old coots who refuse to sell tomorrow for today's comfort. Funny thing is, the best legacy isn't blood or brick. It's the story folks tell when the dust settles and the flowers finally bloom where the bulldozers failed.